The job wasn't fancy, but it would pay the bills, and that was what I needed right then. I'd graduated high school a few years ago, and no sooner had I thought about entering the job market than COVID hit and shut a lot of the world down. Suddenly, most of the things I would be qualified to do would make me a non-essential worker, so I decided to make my mom happy by going to college. She wanted me to take the time and get a degree or a certificate or something, but after 2 years and 2 changes of major, I had very little to show for my efforts. My counselor, after scowling at my file for a few minutes, finally sighed and said something to me that I'll never forget. Some people do well in school. To some people, this is a chance to engage with peers and better themselves, but this isn't the case for everyone. I feel like you may be trying too hard to be something that someone else wants you to be. Why not go out and live a little? Come back when you decide what you might like to be. Mom didn't much care for that answer, and she said if I was planning to drop out of school, then I would need to help with the bills. Dad was retired, and Mom was getting ready to retire. The last thing they wanted was another useless mouth to feed. So, started looking for a job, but the list of potential positions wasn't very long. I didn't want to flip burgers or wash cars or something I'd have to fight high school kids for, but I didn't have the skills for anything like maintenance work or coding. I didn't have the job experience for anything that wasn't entry level, and when they asked if I'd be willing to work nights, I said I would. When the site I was using sent me a list of potential jobs, I grimaced at the 6 names. Not a lot of options, but I suppose there had to be something there. There were 2 fast food jobs, so they went out. There was a part-time janitor position, but I was looking for something full-time. That left a job with a cab company, a bagger at Publix, and an assembly line job for Braxton Moore. That one surprised me because you didn't often see entry-level positions open there. Braxton Moore was an air conditioner company, one of the biggest ones in the region, and it was a place where people usually stayed for quite some time. I was in for a further surprise when I read the hours. Shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Candidates will need to be able to stand for 3+ hours, be required to work with a particular instruction and minimal breaks, and will not be allowed to leave for the entirety of the shift. Benefits will be from day one, and pay will be very competitive. Looking at the projected pay rate, I saw it was very competitive. That made up my mind. I sent the message to the recruiter, and about an hour later, I had an interview the next day. So that's how I came to be sitting in the offices of Braxton Moore Industrial at 11:30, listening to how I could find fulfillment as an assembly line worker. The work isn't glamorous, but the demand for products has become so great that BMU has decided to open up the facility to offer a night shift position. You'll arrive at 9:30, be at your station at 10, work till the bell rings at 6 a.m. You'll be given 2 30-minute breaks, one at 1 and one at 4, and you'll be expected to be at your station at all times. Understand? I nodded, telling him it sounded pretty cut and dry, and he chuckled as he said it was as easy or as hard as I decided to make it. There is one important thing you should know about the job before you take it. The owner, Mr. Moore, likes to keep the lights off after the second shift leaves. There are lights at the station, but the floor lights are cut off at 10 as a cost-saving measure. You aren't afraid of the dark, are you? He asked, making it sound like a joke. I told him I wasn't, and he seemed to like that. I answered a few more questions, and the interviewer seemed impressed. He shook my hand and told me to expect a call back. But a week later, I was milling around the break room as I waited for the others to arrive. A few others showed up, maybe 5 or 6, and it looked as if they were keeping the crew small. When a lady in a pantsuit arrived for orientation, I expected her to comment that it had been a slow hiring cycle. But no, she said it looked like everyone was there and told us to have a seat so we could get started. You will be part of our new night line. You will be placed at a station, and it will be your job to assemble the products as diagrammed. Your station has its own purpose, and as posted, you will be working in 3-hour shifts between breaks. When you're at your station, I must ask that you not leave. The floor is dark, due to the lights being on timers, and you could get hurt if you wander onto the manufacturing floor. What if we have an emergency or something? Asked a girl a row ahead of me. There's a phone at your workstation, but we do ask that you leave your cell phones in the lockers. Here," she said, indicating the locker at the back of the room. "Locks will be provided, but if you want your own, we understand that too. I must impress upon you the importance of not leaving your workstation. It's very dark on the work floor, and you could get hurt or killed if you go exploring on your own, I mean." We went over a few things, mostly the general idea of AC manufacture, but that line kept sticking in my head. Was the machinery on while the lights were off? The cost-saving measure had to be negligible when compared to the cost of running the machines. Wouldn't it make more sense to just shut down at night? I was still thinking about it as they led us out to the floor and showed us the stations. They were little plexiglass booths with an open back, and the conveyor belt would send the parts you needed to your station for assembly. It was pretty straightforward, and I could see diagrams at each station that showed you how your pieces snapped in and how each station did its part. The second shifters were kind enough to show us what each station did, telling us that each one was pretty much the same in the long run. I found myself hanging out around Station 4 for the most part, and when the bell rang at 10, I stepped inside and figured I'd stay here. The guy who had been showing me the ropes, his hand-stitched name tag reading Russ, shook my hand in passing, wishing me luck on my first night. Something was stuck to my palm when he left, but he walked off too fast for me to call out to him. Then suddenly, the others were scrambling to get to their positions, and we were getting ready to start our first night. They kept the belt running pretty slow that first night, but just as some of us started getting the hang of it, the lights went out with a resounding chunk, and we were left in individual pools cast by the safety lights over our workstation. Some of them yelled in surprise when the noise came, but I was kind of expecting it. The lights actually went out at 11 p.m., I made a note, and wouldn't come on till 6 a.m. 7 hours of working in the dark. What fun. "Don't be alarmed," came a voice over the PA. "You were told that the lights would be going off. Continue to work and everything will be fine." There was some nervous chit-chat between stations, but they all pretty well went back to work. We had probably assembled about 8 or 9 air conditioners by the time 1 a.m. came, and when someone with a flashlight made a noise behind me, I jumped a little. "Break time," said a pudgy security guy with a bright light. He and another guy led us all to the break room so we could stretch our legs and get a snack. And as we ate our crackers and drank sodas, we got to know our fellow line workers a little. There were 3 girls, Maria, Lisa, and Tracy, and Kenny, a haggard-looking guy in his mid-40s, and Lewis, who was around my age. Kenny and Lewis and I sat together as we discussed what had brought us to this point in our lives. Kenny had been laid off along with the rest of the paper mill in the next town over, and Lewis had been part of a tech startup that had fallen hard. Both of them had suddenly found themselves unemployed and looking for something to pay bills with, which had led them here. "I tell you, though," Kenny said, his voice sounding spooky as it graveled out, "I can't wait to get back to the middle or day shift. Working in the dark is downright spooky. I could swear something was looking at me the whole time I was working out there." Kenny had taken the first booth, having the most experience with assembly line work, and he had the most floor space available behind him. From the 4th booth, I really couldn't see much with all the shadowy machinery behind me, but I imagined Kenneth, or whoever had taken a spot number 2, would have a front row seat for every clank and grind of the gears and bits. "Might be good to invest in some ear protection," I joked, but Kenneth just shook his head. "Nah, I don't reckon I'd feel any better if I couldn't hear anything. Beneath all them moving bits, it's almost like I can hear something moving out there. Like something with claws scrabbling on the ground. You guys hear anything like that? Like a weird noise under the machinery?" Both Lewis and I shook our heads, and Kenny got a weird look on his face as he looked into the mouth of his soda can. "It's like rats or something, I don't know. It's hard to be out there with so little light, is all I'm saying." They took us back on the floor not long after that, but what Kenny had said must have stuck in my head. I found myself listening for the scuttling as I worked. The work was honestly a little mindless. AC units are like high-end computers, at least the ones we were making, and the process was kind of idiot-proof. As long as you were paying attention and the damn unit was facing in the right direction on the belt, you were pretty much assured to put it where it needed to be. The units were coming in a little quicker now, and when the box of parts I had ran empty, I pushed the button next to the station to stop the line so I could get another box of parts. After a while, I would push the green button when I had 10 left so the line wouldn't stop because of me. The line still stopped sometimes, but I knew that if I could be as efficient as possible, it would go farther to getting on the day shift. I had hit the button at about 3 a.m., my belly really looking forward to that next break at 4, when the line stopped altogether and someone down the way dropped their box of parts loudly. I heard parts and pieces scatter, the worker apologizing to the guard who had brought it to her, and as the sound of the line died down again, I looked into the gloom of the factory and thought I heard something out there. There was definitely the clang of metal and the whir of moving parts, but there was something else out there too. A smaller sound, a skittering sound, and as I fixed on it, I saw something else, a pair of coal red eyes that looked at me through the gloom. We locked eyes for a moment. Whatever possessed those eyes very interested in my attention, but when the little bell went off to signify the line was going again, I turned back to get my parts in before it moved on. I glanced over my shoulder again, looking for the source of the eyes, but they were already gone. By 5:30, the light was coming in through the window, and when 6 a.m. hit, the lights came on just as loudly as they had gone off, signaling the end of the work night. We filed out as the day shift filed in, and the lady in the pantsuit from orientation told us we had built about 60 units last night. The general expectation is 300 in a 24-hour period, but that was a full line. You should be very proud of your efforts, but tonight, your target will be 100 units, since you know what you're doing now. Lewis and I walked out talking, Kenneth saying he had parked out front and going the other way, and as I climbed into my car and headed home, I was actually looking forward to hitting the line again tonight. It wasn't hard work, just tedious, and it was honestly kind of nice to have something easy to do. I knew the pressure would be on tonight to make more and keep the line moving, but I felt sure that we could manage it. I had already forgotten about the weird eyes as I pulled into the front yard and headed up the stairs to sleep, but when I put my hand in my pocket, I remembered the scrap of paper that Russ had handed me the night before. Wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't the scrawl that was written on the little paper square. 1. If you hear scraping from the dark, don't turn around. 2. If you smell death or rotten meat, don't look and don't stop working. 3. This one's the most important. If you see the eyes looking at you, look away as fast as possible. I looked over the note a few times, trying to decide if it was a trick or something. It would be up some of these guys' alley to try to run a goof on the new guy, and I figured maybe that was what this was. Russ had seemed pretty well put together. Normal, I mean, but I guess this might be just something people did around here. I drifted off, thinking about those eyes, thinking about how maybe the line had saved me from something terrible. But what? I decided I needed answers, but first, I needed sleep. I came in around 9 that night, getting there a little earlier than I meant to, and found a familiar face in the break room. Russ was nursing a Dr. Pepper and smiled as he saw me come in. "Hey, it's my replacement. How did 4 treat you last night?" He pulled out a chair at his table, inviting me to sit. "Pretty good," I said, getting my own soda as I took a seat near him. "I was wondering if you could tell me anything about this," I said as I pushed the folded note towards him. He inhaled, putting his hand over the note as he grimaced around. "I think I'd like a smoke. How about you, kid? Can I interest you in a smoke?" I didn't smoke, but I nodded anyway and followed him out to the smoking area. The night air was bracing as we stood on the veranda of the break room, Russ lighting up as he glanced around. "You get a chance to show that to anyone?" "No." "Good. Don't. Especially not anyone from management." "Why not?" "It could get me in a lot of trouble, but I hate that they don't warn the new guys about, what's out there." I asked him what was out there, and he exhaled smoke bitterly. "Before I worked the second shift, I was on the night shift. It's not brand new, as they would like people to think it is. It's been going for years. It usually operates through word of mouth or through particular agencies. They say, if you exemplify yourself on nights, it's a fast track to second shift. When I called you my replacement, you see, I wasn't kidding. I'm preparing to go to day shift. The brass ring as far as anyone around here is concerned. I've earned it, though. I've done 5 years on second shift, just waiting for an opening. But I've never forgotten the nights I spent on that dark floor as I assembled AC units by the little light overhead. It was your first night, but I'll go ahead and assume you probably saw something. I wanted to deny it for some reason, but I ended up just nodding and telling him about the eyes. He nodded and kind of blew smoke out of his nose. Yeah, the eyes. How many sets did you see? Just one, I told him, not really liking the question. Good. One's okay. If you see 2 sets, one above the other, look away immediately. If you see 3 sets, well, it's probably already too late by then. Too late for what? I asked, not liking all the secrecy. I don't know, but it's not something you want to mess with. It takes people sometimes, people who really see it or do something it doesn't like. You can hear it when it's getting close. Its claws or whatever are sharp, and I've seen the maintenance guys trying to buff them off the floor sometimes. There's a smell to it as well, like rotten garbage or old meat, but you only really smell it if it gets close. The eyes are the most important part. Don't look at it if you can help it. It doesn't like being looked at. But if you're looking and it opens its 3rd set of eyes, it's probably too late anyway. At that point, don't blink, because the second you blink, it'll get you. I heard the higher-ups were impressed with you and the guy in Spot 1. Get through your training period, and they'll likely bump one, if not both of you, up to mid-shift. Take the promotion if they do. Get off nights as fast as you can, and don't look back. It's a death trap. A trap that gets closer to killing you the longer you... The door opened then, and the woman in the pantsuit stuck her head out, smiling at Russ and I. There you are. Everyone's ready to get going. Russ, I trust you aren't trying to scare the new guy off. Russ smirked, pitching his cigarette away as he turned to go back in. Just showing the newbie the ropes, Miss Baker. He's got a good head on his shoulders. I want to make sure he makes it to mid-shift. As do we all, the woman said, smiling at Russ as he took his leave. That night was rough. We were going from the time we got there, till the accident happened at 2 a.m. The lady had told us flatly that she was giving us a goal of 100 units by 6 a.m., and she assured us that she was serious. If you are moved onto the other shifts, there will be daily goals to meet. Bonuses are given to shifts that meet their goals, but layoffs often follow the ones that don't. Don't get laid off because of dilly-dallying. By our first break of the night, we had made about 50. We all sat together that night, talking about how if we kept it up, we'd make our goal by the time the next break came around. Everyone was excited, wanting to make our goal on the second day. Wasn't as if it had never been done before, but we were excited to make it happen, nonetheless. Kenneth was quiet as we talked, though, shivering a little as he sat and munched the sandwich he'd brought for dinner. It was clear that something was on his mind, but whatever it was, he had no intention of sharing it with us. We came back at about 1:30 and set to our task. We were making good time, sending them down as quickly as we could, but that's when we heard the noise. It was different than the sound when the lights went on. This one was a lighter sound, like the buzzing just before the lights go out. I glanced up, my eyes seeing the lights overhead buzz, and then suddenly, they went out. Not just mine, but all of them went out, all at once. It was like a breaker had been thrown, and the voice of the security guy came overhead and told us to calm down while they got the lights back on. I heard the chit-chat erupt further down, even the winking of an illegal cell phone as the flashlight came on, but I kept my eyes on the line. I remembered Russ telling me about the eyes and the claws, and I was afraid to look too hard into the shadows. I heard something as the machinery powered down slowly, a noise on the edge of hearing. I heard the light scamper of nails, and my spine nearly tingled. As the machines came to a halt, the clicking sounded thunderous without the noise to cover it. It was quiet, like mice feet, but sounded to me like fingernails walking across bricks. It clipped along like a whole procession of fingers, and I wondered if there was more than one. I kept my eyes forward, the clicking going past, and that's when I smelled the smell. Russ hadn't done it justice. It was like roadkill in the sun, like the piles of guts my grandpa used to leave outside the slaughterhouse after he butchered a deer. And as it moved past, the cloud settled over me. It took everything I had not to gag, and as the cloud went away, I heard others comment on it. When someone further down the row screamed, I turned in time to see the lights come back on and see Lisa pressed against the wall of her workstation, hyperventilating. The security guys came in a hurry as her screams peeled up towards the ceiling, and the assembly line ground to a halt once again. After some quiet talk, Lisa was escorted off the floor, and we had to figure out how to continue without her. Tracy agreed to work both stations, but Tracy hadn't been fast to start with, and our productivity slowed and lost momentum. We managed another 30 in this way, Tracy and Lewis swapping out from time to time, and we ended our night with about 80 units. The woman seemed pleased that we had made it so close after losing a person, but when I saw Lisa in the parking lot after I got out, I realized I wanted to know what had set her off. Had she been sitting out here for the last 4 hours? Did she not have a car of her own? "You okay?" I asked, coming to sit beside her at the bus stop. She nodded, sniffling a little as she looked at her shoes. I don't think I'm coming back tonight." "Why?" I asked. We had never been close. I don't think I'd ever actually spoken to her before now, but she seemed willing to talk as we sat on the cold bench by the bus stop. I had my phone out, using the light. I knew I shouldn't, but I took it on the floor. I turned around, wanting to take a picture to post later, just a joke post. But when I snapped the picture, I found something else. It was shadowy. I couldn't see it very well, but it was terrible, she said with a shudder. It was like a scuttling tumor with too many teeth. Its eyes were like little pits, devoid of life. I don't know what I saw, but it made me feel like I was a little girl again, listening to the monsters under my bed. I offered to take her home, but she said she would rather just wait on the bus. I sat with her until it got there, and that night, Lisa wasn't there. There was someone new waiting for us, a young kid who looked fresh out of high school, and we welcomed Nick onto the assembly line. He took up Lisa's old spot, bopping his head as he listened to music at his station, and was never bothered by the problems that Kenneth and I seemed to be plagued by. I forgot to mention that Lisa wasn't the only casualty of the night shift, it seemed. Kenneth didn't stop coming to work. He had bills to pay and people depending on him, but he just got more and more haggard-looking as the week went on. He clearly wasn't sleeping, and he seemed anxious every time he had to return to the floor after breaks or at the start of shift. This went on till Wednesday of our third week. It went on until Kenneth snapped. It was another night of working the assembly line, making AC units as fast as we possibly could. We were easily meeting our 100 units a night goal and had even completed 125 a few times. The higher-ups were impressed with their new prospects, but the word was that Kenneth and I were the standouts. The talk was that at the end of the first month, Braxton Moore was planning to extend jobs to the standouts on the floor, and my name was on the list next to Kenneth's. If he had just held out for another couple of days, Kenneth would have been free of the demons that haunted his night. It was about 3:30 in the morning, and the noises had been worse than usual. The skittering had gone back and forth since 8 o'clock, and the smell had been something constant. Security had claimed there was a dead raccoon in the vents or something, but I think most of us suspected it was something else. More than a few of them had noticed the smell, if not the clicking nails, and the eyes that sometimes found you were hard to ignore. We were all doing our best to ignore it when Kenneth suddenly loosed a primal scream and made us all jump. "Go away! I'm sick of this! I'm sick of all of this! I'm gonna kill you!" he yelled, fists balled as he stalked into the darkness. He ran off into the gloom, and before I could think better of it, I went after him. Lewis and Kenneth had become something like friends to me in the last few weeks, and I couldn't let Kenneth go off and get himself killed. I ran after him, the dark closing around me, but I had stumbled about 50 feet on the floor and hit my head on something as I went down hard. I lost a couple of minutes. but I realized how much I had nearly lost when my vision cleared. There were 2 sets of open eyes hovering over me, and the third had just slid open. The creature towered over me, standing on a body covered in long, twitching fingers, grinning down at me with a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth. His body was lumpy like a giant potato, but his teeth were just as sharp as Lisa had said. His eyes were burning pits with smoldering coals, all of them staring at me as I lay on my back, my head throbbing. I nearly lost before it even started, but I remembered before the pain could force a wincing blink out of me. I held the creature's nightmare gaze, the eyes smoldering into me like hot coals, and I could feel it regarding me as its heat dried my corneas. I had always been pretty good at staring contests when I was a kid, but this one took the cake. It probably made a difference that my life was on the line, but in a lot of ways, this was just another bully trying to stare me down. Nothing mattered at that moment. Not Kenneth, not the job, nothing but beating this thing and proving it could be done. If I lost, then I'd never know it. If I won, however, I'd be the only one who would know, since no one would believe me. It felt like we stared at each other for hours, but when all 3 sets of eyes finally blinked, I breathed in a sigh of relief. It clicked away on those nubby legs, the ends likely tipped in claws or something, and when I saw flashlights and heard people calling my name, I started backpedaling towards them. The security guys were as relieved to see me as I was to see them, and they helped me to the break room to get the little gash on my head seen about. They told me to take it easy for a while, and I was glad for an excuse to breathe. After what I had just been through, a little break was the best I could hope for before having to suck it up and go back to the floor. The woman in the pantsuit came in half an hour later, and after finding everyone in the break room, told us to go home for the night. They still hadn't found Kenneth, and didn't sound like they expected to. She asked me to stop before I could leave, calling me into a nearby office before handing me a manila envelope. Inside was an offer for the second shift, something I'd been expecting to see. The higher-ups are impressed with your work, and except for leaving your post tonight to try to get Kenneth, they were impressed with your ability to follow expressed rules. They want to offer you a spot on the mid-shift, if you want it. That was about a year ago, and I've been working mids ever since. The shift is as different as, well, as night and day, not to sound too cliche. With the floor lit up, it's easy to see all the things that looked scary in the dark and sort out all the moving parts as just machinery or belts or something else. I haven't heard the clicking or smelled the smell since starting on mids, but sometimes I still see those eyes. It isn't anything consistent, but it's more often than I would like. Sometimes if you look up into the mouth of the industrial fans near the ceiling, just before shift change, you can see a glowing pair of eyes just waiting for the lights to go out. It fears the lights for some reason, and it won't come onto the floor until the lights are off and the night shifts are bathed in the protective bubbles. I won't work nights anymore, and no one has asked, but every time I think about picking up a night shift for some extra cash, I think about those eyes and decide differently. Lewis is coming to mids next week, his rise taking a bit longer than mine, and he seems glad. It's nice being out of the darkness and the overbearing interests of the night overseer who scuttles and watches eternally. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story? Or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, and Sue Casper for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Sarah ASMR42, and Bella Lee for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks everyone so much. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. For just $5 a month, you get your stories 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. Also, if you'd like to join our Ghostly Reader contributor tier over on Patreon, you get a book anytime I write one on your doorstep, as long as you live in the continental U.S., of course. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.